I'm Julia, 27 female. I live alone in a small but tidy apartment in the city, about a 40-minute drive from the suburban house where I grew up. I'm a software engineer for a major tech company, a job I love that pays well, though my parents have never quite understood what it is I actually do. This story is about the moment I stopped trying to make them understand and instead decided to show them what they had so carelessly chosen to ignore. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, there were always two distinct realities in our household, the one that belonged to my sister, Ava, and the one that belonged to me. We were both loved, I suppose, but the quality of that love was vastly different. Ava's was a bright, public, celebratory love. Mine was a quiet, assumed, utilitarian love. She was the golden child, and I was the ghost. Ava was the sun, and everything in our family's orbit revolved around her warmth and brilliance. I was more like a distant moon, reflecting a little of that light but mostly existing in the shadows, my presence acknowledged but rarely celebrated. Ava is 4 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, she was a firework. She had big, expressive eyes, a laugh that could charm anyone, and a natural charisma that made people gravitate toward her. She was a cheerleader in high school, dated the quarterback, and was voted prom queen. My parents, David and Helen, soaked it all up. Our living room mantelpiece was a shrine to her achievements. Gleaming trophies, framed photos of her in her prom dress, a special shelf for her cheerleading awards. My own accomplishments, like winning the state-level math competition or getting a perfect score on the SAT math section, were met with a simple, "That's nice, honey," before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Ava's latest social triumph. My dad, David, a civil engineer, understood things he could see and touch. A bridge, a building, a trophy, these were real. My world of abstract code, of building digital architecture that existed only on servers, was incomprehensible to him. "So you just type all day?" he'd ask, a slight frown on his face, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. My mom, Helen, was a high school English teacher. You would think she, of all people, would appreciate the nuance of a child who was different, who preferred books over boys and logic puzzles over parties. But she was just as captivated by Ava's sparkle. Mom would spend hours helping Ava with her history posters, making them glitter and pop, while my advanced calculus homework was something I was expected to handle on my own. "You're the smart one, Julia," she'd say, as if it were an explanation for her absence. It wasn't a compliment, it was a dismissal. It meant, "You don't need me." This dynamic solidified as we got older. When Ava decided she wanted to get into real estate right after high school, my parents were her biggest cheerleaders. Dad co-signed the loan for her to get a flashy but reliable sedan so she could drive clients around. Mom helped her pick out a professional wardrobe of blazers and stylish shoes. They celebrated her first sale with a fancy dinner out, a bottle of champagne, and a toast to our little go-getter. Meanwhile, I had worked my way through a demanding computer science program at a top university. I earned scholarships to cover most of my tuition, and I worked part-time as a coder for a university lab to cover my rent and living expenses. My parents never offered financial help, and I never asked for it. It was simply understood that I was the responsible one, the one who could take care of herself. When I graduated with high honors, I called them with the news. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear," my mom said, but I could hear the distraction in her voice. "Listen, I have to run. Ava's having some trouble with a client and I need to talk her through it." I remember standing there with the phone in my hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, feeling a familiar, hollow ache in my chest. My graduation, a culmination of 4 years of relentless effort, was a footnote in the ongoing saga of Ava's life. The job I landed post-graduation was a dream come true for me. It was at a prestigious tech firm with a starting salary that was more than both my parents' incomes combined. I was proud, but when I told them, their reaction was muted. "That's a lot of money, Julia," my dad said, his tone laced with a hint of suspicion, as if a number that big couldn't be real or respectable. "Are you sure that's stable?" They never asked about my projects, my team, or the complex problems I was solving. My work was just an abstract number on a pay stub to them, not a source of pride. For Ava, every small step was a milestone. For me, even the biggest leaps were met with a shrug. I was the ghost in the machine of our family, the quiet engine that ran in the background, unnoticed and unappreciated. And for a long time, I accepted it. I told myself it was just the way things were, until the day of the car. The day it all shattered was a bright, sunny Saturday in June. I got a text from my mom the week before. "Big surprise for Ava this weekend. Be here at 2 p.m. on Saturday. Don't be late." The message was brimming with an excitement that was never, ever directed at me. I sighed, already knowing what to expect. It would be a party centered entirely around my sister, and I would be expected to be a smiling, supportive prop. Still, she was my sister, and this was my family, so I agreed. I even stopped at a nice bakery on the way and picked up a box of artisanal cupcakes. A small contribution to whatever celebration was about to unfold. When I pulled up to my parents' house, the driveway was already full of cars belonging to our aunts, uncles, and a few of Ava's friends. As I walked up the path, I saw it. In the middle of the perfectly manicured lawn was a brand-new, top-of-the-line luxury SUV. It was a gleaming pearlescent white, a massive red bow sitting ridiculously on its hood. Balloons in shades of pink and gold were tied to the side mirrors, bobbing gently in the breeze. My parents and Ava were standing beside it, beaming. Ava had just passed her real estate broker's exam, and this, apparently, was her reward. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Just 6 months earlier, I had paid off the last of my student loans, the small portion that my scholarships hadn't covered. It was a huge personal milestone. I had worked extra freelance projects, lived frugally, and poured every spare dollar into becoming debt-free before my 27th birthday. I had mentioned it to my parents on the phone, proud of my discipline. "Oh, that's smart, honey," was the only response I got. No balloons, no party, no acknowledgement of the hard work it represented. Yet here was a car, likely costing over $60,000, being presented as a trophy for Ava passing a single exam. I plastered on a smile and walked over, holding the box of cupcakes. "Wow, congratulations, Ava, this is incredible," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally cheerful to my own ears. "Jules, isn't it amazing?" Ava squealed, running over to give me a quick, one-armed hug. I had no idea. Mom and Dad are just the best. My dad was glowing with pride. "Nothing's too good for my girl," he said, patting the hood of the car as if it were a prize-winning racehorse. "She's a real shark in the business world now, needs a car that shows it." My mom then emerged from the house carrying a large, professionally decorated cake. On it, written in elegant pink frosting, were the words, "Congratulations, Ava, the world is yours." Everyone cheered. They cut the cake, popped a bottle of champagne, and took endless photos of Ava leaning against her new car, posing with the cake and hugging our parents. I stood to the side, clapping along, feeling more invisible than ever. I took a few photos on my phone for them, playing the part of the dutiful sister and daughter. The party went on for another hour, a whirlwind of praise for Ava. My aunts and uncles all marveled at the car, at her ambition, at how successful she had become at just 23. No one asked me about my job. No one asked me about my life. I was just Julia, Ava's older sister. As the guests started to leave, I helped my mom clean up the cake plates and wrapping paper. My dad came over to me, a piece of cake in his hand. He had that look on his face, a sort of placid, self-satisfied contentment that always appeared after he'd done something he considered grand. He must have noticed the quietness in my demeanor, the slight stiffness in my smile. "You doing okay, Julia?" he asked, taking a bite of cake. "I'm fine, Dad. It's a very generous gift," I said, my voice flat. He nodded, chewing thoughtfully. Then he said the words that would change everything. The words that were meant to be a placating pat on the head, but instead felt like a slap in the face. "Hey," he said, his tone casual, almost an afterthought. "I know we didn't do anything for you paying off your school loans. We'll do something small for you later, okay? Maybe take you out to dinner next week. Something small, for later. The words hung in the air between us, dripping with condescension. My 4 years of university, my scholarships, my part-time jobs, my disciplined saving, my freelance work, all of that effort, culminating in financial freedom, was worth something small. Ava passes one test, and she gets a luxury car, a party, a cake, and the admiration of our entire family. My monumental achievement gets a promise of a modest, deferred dinner. In that moment, something inside me didn't just crack, it atomized. The lifetime of quiet acceptance, of swallowing my her. Tea and telling myself it didn't matter was over. I just looked at him, the fake smile finally melting from my face. "Don't worry about it, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I've got it covered." Before he could respond, I turned, walked out of the house, got into my perfectly practical 5-year-old sedan, and drove away. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done waiting for them to celebrate me. I would do something big for myself, and they wouldn't be invited. The drive home from my parents' house was a blur. The usual 40-minute trip felt like it stretched for an eternity, with my dad's words replaying in my head on a torturous loop. "We'll do something small for you later." Each time I heard them in my memory, a fresh wave of cold, hard anger washed over me. It wasn't just about the car or the party. It was about the casual, almost unconscious dismissal of my entire life's work. It was the confirmation of a truth I had always known, but never wanted to fully admit to myself. In my family's eyes, I was secondary. My achievements were footnotes, my struggles were my own, and my value was a quiet assumption, not a cause for celebration. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the familiar space, which usually felt like a sanctuary, but now felt like a lonely outpost. I sank onto my couch, the box of untouched, artisanal cupcakes still in my hand. I opened the lid and just stared at them. I had bought them to celebrate my sister, to participate in the family ritual of adoring Ava. The gesture now felt pathetic, like a peace offering to a kingdom that had never considered me a citizen. That's when I called Marco. He was my best friend, my colleague at work, and the one person who understood the strange, isolating world of being a high-achieving but low-key person. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" he asked immediately. He could always tell. My silence had a specific weight to it that he had learned to recognize. "The dam broke." I told him everything. I told him about the pearlescent white SUV, the giant red bow, the balloons, the cake, and then I told him what my dad had said. I delivered the line flatly, without emotion, because if I had let any feeling into my voice, I would have shattered. He said they'd do something small for me later. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Marco wasn't offering empty platitudes or telling me I was overreacting. He was a data scientist. He processed information, identified patterns, and delivered a logical conclusion. "Julia," he said finally, his voice firm but gentle. "This isn't about the car. You know that, right? This is the data point that proves the hypothesis you've been ignoring for 27 years. He was right, that's exactly what it was. It was the final piece of evidence in a long, painful study of my family's dynamics. I started thinking back, and suddenly, dozens of other small moments clicked into place, forming a suffocating mosaic of favoritism. I remembered my 16th birthday. I had wanted a proper party with my friends. My mom had said the house was too small and it was too much of a hassle. We had a quiet family dinner at home instead. A year later, for Ava's 16th, my parents rented out a local event space and hired a DJ. "She's just more of a social butterfly," my mom had explained, as if my desires were less valid because I was an introvert. I remembered when I got accepted into my top choice university. My dad's reaction was to immediately start worrying about the cost, even though I'd already told him about my scholarship. "That's a fancy private school, Julia. Are you sure a state school wouldn't be more practical?" he'd asked. When Ava announced she was going to skip college and get her real estate license, he had clapped her on the back and praised her for her practical, go-getter attitude. Every choice I made was scrutinized for its practicality and cost. Every choice Ava made was celebrated for its boldness and ambition. The unspoken truth was that they had cast us in roles from a very young age. Ava was the star, the one who needed the spotlight, the applause, and the financial and emotional investment to shine. I was the reliable, behind-the-scenes crew member. I was the one who was smart and responsible, which was their code for self-sufficient. My successes were expected, and therefore not noteworthy. Ava's successes were delightful surprises, evidence of her dazzling potential. They poured resources into her, time, money, emotional energy, because they saw her as a high-risk, high-reward investment. I was a blue-chip stock, reliable, steady, and boring. You don't throw a party when a blue-chip stock inches up a quarter of a point. They don't see you, Julia, Marco said softly through the phone. They see the version of you that makes their lives easier. The daughter who doesn't ask for anything, who handles her own problems, who doesn't need a fuss made over her. You've been so capable for so long that they've forgotten you're a person who might actually want to be celebrated, not just appreciated for being low maintenance. His words landed with the force of a physical blow, but they were also incredibly freeing. He had articulated the core of my pain perfectly. It wasn't that my parents were evil. In their own way, they probably thought they were being fair. They were giving Ava what they thought she needed to succeed, and they were giving me the space they thought I wanted. But they never once stopped to ask me what I actually wanted or to see my life through my own eyes. They saw me only in relation to my sister. She was the project. I was the finished product, there to be relied upon but not improved. Sitting there in my darkened apartment, I felt the anger begin to transform. It wasn't a hot, fleeting rage anymore. It was becoming something colder, heavier, and more purposeful. It was becoming resolve. My dad's offer of something small was an insult, but it was also a gift. It was the catalyst I needed to stop seeking their validation. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a gold star from parents who only had eyes for the glittery art project next to mine. It was time to stop. It was time to be my own judge, my own jury, and my own biggest champion. "You're right," I said to Marco, my voice clear and steady for the first time all evening. "They don't see me, but that's about to change. They're going to see what I've been building, all on my own, and it's not going to be small." The days following the party were filled with a strange, empowering silence. My phone, which would usually have a few texts from the family group chat or a missed call from my mom, was quiet. They were likely giving me space, assuming I was having a minor, temporary sulk that would resolve itself. They had no idea that my silence wasn't a sulk, it was a study. My resolve had solidified into a concrete objective. I needed to understand the true scope of the disparity. I needed to see the favoritism not just as a feeling, but as a quantifiable fact. My dad's offer of something small had been about my student loans. That's where I decided to begin my investigation. As a software engineer and someone who thinks in data, I decided to do what I do best: create a ledger. I opened a new, encrypted spreadsheet on my personal laptop and titled it the Family Balance Sheet. It felt dramatic, but it was also fitting. I was about to conduct a forensic accounting of my own life. I started with the big, obvious things. On one side of the ledger, I listed myself, Julia. On the other, Ava. Under Ava's column, the first entry was Luxury SUV Est. Value, $60,000. I did a quick search online for the model I'd seen on the lawn and confirmed the price. Under my own column, I wrote Dinner Promised Value. Seeing it written down, side by side, was stark and sickening. Then I started digging deeper, going back through years of my life. I had to reconstruct it from memory, from old bank statements I had archived, and from a few painful email chains. Education. Ava, parents paid for her real estate licensing courses, exam fees, and all associated materials. I estimated this to be around $3,000. They also bought her a new laptop to get her started. Another $1,500. Julia, I had a full scholarship for tuition for 2 years and a partial for the other 2. I calculated the remaining tuition I had paid myself, which came to about $25,000. My parents had contributed a total of $500 as a graduation gift. I had bought my own laptop with money from my high school summer job. Vehicles. Ava, her first car, a used but respectable sedan, was bought for her when she was 17. Cost, $15,000. Insurance and maintenance were paid by my dad until she was 22. Now, the new $60,000 SUV. Total, $75,000 plus years of expenses. Julia, I bought my own first car, a 10-year-old beater, for $4,000 after saving for a year. I paid for my own insurance from day one. I later upgraded to my current sedan using my first signing bonus from my job. Parental contribution, $0. Housing. Ava, after she graduated high school, she continued to live at home, rent-free, for 3 years while she found her footing. She still had meals cooked for her and her laundry done. The value of this was immense. I calculated the average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in their area over 3 years. It was a conservative estimate of $54,000. Julia, I moved out for college at 18. I paid for my own dorms and later my own apartments. I never lived at home again. When I would visit, it was as a guest. Parental contribution, $0. Milestones and gifts. The list went on and on. There was the high school graduation trip to Hawaii for Ava and 2 of her friends, which my parents funded, $5,000. My graduation trip was a bus ride home with my packed-up dorm room. There were the designer bags and clothes they bought Ava for her birthdays, while I received practical gift cards to bookstores. There was the down payment assistance they had already promised Ava for her first condo. A figure she had happily announced at Christmas was going to be at least $50,000. I worked on this ledger for a week every evening after work. It was emotionally draining. Each line item was a fresh sting, a memory of being overlooked, a confirmation of a long-held suspicion. It was a ledger of lies, not of explicit lies, but of the lies we tell ourselves to maintain family peace. The lie that things are fair enough. The lie that my independence was something I chose rather than something that was required of me. The lie that my parents' love was unconditional when it was, in fact, heavily conditional on how easy I was to manage. When I was finally done, I scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet and created a total line. I had to estimate some things, but I was conservative in all my calculations. The final numbers were staggering. Over the last 10 years, from the time I was 17, my parents had invested, directly and indirectly, well over $200,000 in Ava's life, career, and comfort. My total, the $500 graduation check. I stared at the number on the screen. It wasn't about the money. I earned a great salary. I didn't need their money, but the number was a symbol. It was a cold, hard metric of their priorities. It was the dollar value of their validation. My sister was a $200,000 investment. I was a $500 afterthought. Marco came over that Friday night. I had told him what I was doing, and he was cautiously supportive, worried it was causing me more pain. I turned my laptop around and showed him the spreadsheet. He was silent for a long time, his eyes scanning each line item. "Wow," he breathed, "this is damning." "It is," I said, feeling strangely calm. The pain had burned away, leaving behind a cold, clear certainty. This was never about love. It was about investment. They invested in the project they cared about more. "So what now?" Marco asked, closing the laptop. "What do you do with this information?" I looked around my apartment. It was nice, but it was a rental. I had been saving aggressively, putting away more than half of my income every month. I had a significant amount in savings and investments, a fact my family was completely unaware of. They still pictured me in a tiny, struggling artist-style apartment because that's the narrative that fit their view of me. My dad's a civil engineer. He respects things that are built to last. My mom's a teacher. She values a lesson learned, I said, a new idea beginning to form, a blueprint taking shape in my mind. For years, I've been building my career and my finances in the background. They've never seen it. They've never asked to see it. So I'm going to stop building in the dark. I'm going to build something they can't ignore, something real. And the final entry in this ledger is going to be for me. The decision was made. My revenge wouldn't be a screaming match or a dramatic confrontation where I presented my spreadsheet of sorrow. That would only give them the satisfaction of dismissing me as emotional or dramatic. No, my revenge would be quiet, methodical, and constructive. It would be an act of radical self-investment, the kind they had reserved exclusively for Ava. My project was simple and audacious. I was going to buy a house. Not just a starter condo, but a real house, in a great neighborhood, entirely on my own. For the next 6 months, I became a woman on a mission. The rage and hurt I felt were channeled into fuel. At work, I volunteered for a high-stakes project that came with a significant bonus upon completion. It meant longer hours and more stress, but the goal was so clear in my mind that the work felt invigorating. I coded with a ferocity I hadn't felt before, driven by the image of my own front door. My social life took a backseat. I explained the situation to Marco, who became my rock and my sounding board. Operation Independence, he called it, and he was my biggest supporter. We replaced bar nights with budget review nights and brunch outings with open house visits. He helped me vet neighborhoods and pointed out things I would have missed, like outdated electrical panels or signs of water damage. I lived and breathed my financial plan. I created a new spreadsheet, this one filled with hope. I tracked every penny. I canceled streaming services I barely used, cooked all my meals at home, and became an expert at finding the best deals on groceries. My life became a masterclass in deferred gratification. Every dollar I saved wasn't a sacrifice. It was a brick in the foundation of my new life. During this time, my family's calls and texts trickled back in. They noticed my distance, of course. My mom would call and ask, in a slightly wounded tone, why I hadn't been over for Sunday dinner. "I've just been really busy with a big project at work, Mom," I'd say, which was the truth. "Well, you know Ava misses you," she'd reply, effortlessly making my absence about my sister's feelings. "She was saying she wanted to show you the new custom floor mats she got for her car." I would just smile grimly to myself. "That's nice, tell her they sound great." I kept my interactions with them polite, brief, and utterly superficial. I didn't offer any details about my life, and true to form, they didn't press for any. They were content as long as I was playing my role, even from a distance. They had no idea that behind the scenes, I was making the biggest moves of my life. Finding the right house was a challenge. The market was competitive, but I was patient. I was looking for something specific, a house with good bones that maybe needed some cosmetic updates, something I could put my own stamp on. After 4 months of searching, I found it. It was a charming 1940s bungalow in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood known for its good schools and strong community, the kind of neighborhood my parents always talked about as the ideal. It had hardwood floors, a fireplace, and a beautiful backyard with a massive, ancient oak tree. It needed a new kitchen and a fresh coat of paint, but it was perfect. It felt like home the moment I walked in. The financial side was where my secret efforts paid off. I had my down payment ready, a full 20%, so I could avoid private mortgage insurance. It was a sum larger than the down payment my parents had promised Ava. My excellent credit score and high, stable income meant I was approved for a mortgage almost instantly, with a great interest rate. The bank didn't see me as something small. They saw me as a prime investment. The day I signed the closing papers was one of the proudest moments of my life. I sat in the sterile office of the title company, signing my name over and over again. With each stroke of the pen, I felt like I was rewriting my own story. I wasn't Julia, the overlooked daughter. I was Julia, the homeowner, the self-made woman. I didn't tell my family. The silence was a crucial part of the plan. I spent the next 2 months overseeing the renovations. I hired contractors to redo the kitchen, transforming it into a modern, beautiful space with quartz countertops and new appliances. I spent my weekends painting the walls in warm, inviting colors. I furnished the space with carefully chosen pieces that reflected my own taste, not anyone else's. Marco was a saint, helping me assemble furniture, hang pictures, and offering design advice. As the house came together, it became more than just a building. It was a physical manifestation of my independence, my capability, and my worth. It was built not with my parents' money or their approval, but with my own hard work, my own intellect, and my own resolve. Every wall, every fixture, every floorboard was a testament to the person they had never bothered to see. Finally, it was ready, my masterpiece, my something big. It was time for the reveal. I sent a simple text to my parents and Ava. "I have something I'd like you to see. Please come to this address on Saturday at 2 p.m. It's important to me." I included the address of my new house. There was a brief flurry of confused texts in response, but I didn't elaborate. For the first time in my life, I was setting the stage, and they were going to be the audience. Saturday arrived, a cool and crisp autumn day. I was nervous, but it was a different kind of nervousness than I'd ever felt before. It wasn't the anxiety of seeking approval, it was the electric hum of a plan coming to fruition. My house was immaculate. The sun streamed through the newly cleaned windows, illuminating the gleaming hardwood floors. A vase of fresh flowers sat on my new dining room table. On the kitchen counter, I had arranged a bottle of champagne and 4 glasses, a deliberate echo of the celebration they had thrown for Ava. At precisely 2:05 p.m., their car pulled up. I watched from the living room window as they got out. My dad, David, looked at the house with a puzzled expression. My mom, Helen, looked anxious, probably worried this was some kind of intervention. Ava just looked bored, scrolling on her phone. They walked up the stone pathway, their footsteps sounding unnervingly loud in the quiet anticipation. I opened the front door before they could ring the bell. "Julia?" my mom asked, her eyes wide as she took in the freshly painted door and the polished brass handle. "What is this place?" "It's my new house," I said simply, stepping back to let them in. "Welcome." They stepped into the entryway, and their jaws collectively dropped. They stood frozen, looking from the fireplace to the beautifully restored floors to the open-plan living and dining area. Their faces were a comical mixture of shock, confusion, and disbelief. You bow." "At a house," my dad stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He, the civil engineer, looked around as if trying to assess the structural integrity of a story that made no sense to him. "Yes, I did," I said, my voice calm and even. "I closed on it a few months ago, just finished the renovations." Ava finally looked up from her phone, her eyes sweeping across the space. I could see a flicker of something in her expression, not admiration, but a kind of startled jealousy. This was not in the script of our family life. I was the one who lived in a small apartment. She was the one destined for impressive real estate. "How," was the only word Ava could manage to get out. "How could you afford this?" The question hung in the air, thick with all the assumptions they had ever made about me. How could quiet, boring, practical Julia, who never asked for anything, possibly achieve something like this? I led them into the brand new kitchen. The quartz countertops gleamed under the recessed lighting. The stainless steel appliances were a stark contrast to the dated ones in my parents' own home. "I afforded it with my job," I said, turning to face them. I leaned back against the counter, feeling powerful and grounded in my own space for the first time. The one you never ask about. The one that's apparently not as impressive as selling houses, but it pays for this. My mom was still trying to process it. "But why didn't you tell us? We could have helped you." A short, bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Helped me? Mom, when have you ever helped me with anything of this scale? You helped Ava pick out blazers. You co-signed her car loan. You threw her a party for passing an exam. When I paid off my student loans, an actual financial achievement, Dad offered to buy me dinner as an afterthought." I saw a flash of hurt and recognition in my dad's eyes. He remembered. "That's not fair, Julia," he started, his voice defensive. "We always supported you." "No, Dad," I said, my voice firm, cutting him off. "You didn't support me. You tolerated my independence because it was convenient. You outsourced the job of raising me to myself. You poured all your resources, your time, your money, your emotional energy into Ava because she was the project you chose. I was just the one who was supposed to figure it all out on her own. I walked over to the counter and picked up the small, velvet box that I had placed there earlier. 6 months ago, I continued, my voice low and deliberate, you told me you would do something small for me later. Your exact words. It was in that moment that I realized waiting for you to see my worth was a fool's errand. So, I decided to do something big for myself instead. I opened the box. Inside, nestled on the velvet, was not a piece of jewelry, but a single, ornate, vintage-style key. It was a decorative key I had bought for this exact moment, a symbolic representation of my achievement. This, I said, holding up the key, is the key to my house. I earned it. I paid for it. Every floorboard, every nail, every coat of paint in this house was paid for by my unstable tech job and my own discipline. This house is my something big. I let the silence hang in the air. The weight of it was immense. They were finally seeing me, not as the quiet daughter or the responsible sister, but as a capable, successful adult who had built a life without them. And they looked utterly devastated. The narrative they had comfortably lived in for decades had just been publicly dismantled. My dad just shook his head slowly, looking around the room as if it were a monument to his own failure. My mom had tears welling in her eyes. Ava was silent, staring at the floor, the usual bubbly confidence completely gone. I didn't do this to hurt you, I said, which was only a partial lie. I did this to respect myself. I am done being the ghost in this family. I am done being the footnote in Ava's story. This is my story, and from now on, I will be the one who decides how it's written. I walked over to the champagne bottle. I popped the cork, the sound echoing loudly in the quiet room. I poured one glass and one glass only. I raised it high. Congratulations, Julia, I said, looking each of them in the eye. The world is yours. Then I took a long, satisfying sip. They didn't stay long after that. The atmosphere was too thick with unspoken words and unveiled truths. My mom tried to hug me on her way out, a hesitant, fumbling gesture that I did not return. I simply stood still until she let go. My dad couldn't look me in the eye. He just mumbled something about the house having good bones and shuffled out the door. Ava was the last to leave. She paused in the doorway and looked back at me, her expression unreadable. For a second, I thought she might say something real, something from the heart. Instead, she just said, "The countertops are nice," and walked away. After they were gone, I stood. Alone in my beautiful, quiet house. There was no sense of triumph, no adrenaline rush of victory. Instead, I felt a profound and surprising sense of peace. The anger that had fueled me for 6 months had finally burned out, leaving behind not emptiness, but clarity. I hadn't just built a house, I had dismantled a prison. The prison of waiting for their approval, of contorting myself to fit into the tiny box they had built for me. I was free. The days and weeks that followed were defined by a new kind of silence. Before, the silence from my family was a sign of their neglect. Now, it was a boundary I had erected. My phone, once a source of anxiety, became a tool for my own use. The family group chat lay dormant. My mom left a few tearful voicemails. My dad sent a single, awkward text. "We need to talk. I'm proud of you, Julia. I'm sorry." But the most surprising communication came from Ava. A week after the reveal, a small, handwritten card appeared in my new mailbox. Inside, it said, "I never thought about it that way. You were right about a lot of things. I'm sorry." There was no excuse, no justification. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. It didn't fix 2 decades of inequality, but it was a crack in the facade. A start. I didn't reply to any of them immediately. I needed time. I needed to live in my new reality to get to know the person I was without the constant weight of their expectations. I hosted a housewarming party, but it wasn't for them. It was for my chosen family. Marco, my friends from work, the people who had seen me and supported me all along. My house was filled with genuine laughter and warmth. We didn't celebrate a material object. We celebrated community and mutual respect. Marco and I were sitting on my new back patio, looking up at the stars through the branches of the old oak tree. So, was it worth it? he asked. The revenge. I thought about it for a moment. It stopped being about revenge somewhere along the way, I confessed. It started as a way to prove them wrong, but it turned into a way to prove myself right. I needed to know that I could be my own safety net, my own biggest supporter, my own source of celebration. The house was just the proof. Slowly, I began to redefine my relationship with my family, on my own terms. I finally called my dad back. We had a long, difficult conversation. For the first time, he didn't try to justify his actions. He listened. He acknowledged the disparity, the unconscious favoritism that had defined our lives. He admitted that my independence had made it easy for him to be lazy as a father, to focus his attention on the squeakier wheel. My relationship with my mom is still a work in progress. Her identity is so wrapped up in being a mother, and my actions forced her to confront the fact that she had failed one of her children. It's a painful realization for her, and she still sometimes falls back into old patterns, trying to position herself as the victim. But now, I have the strength and the distance to call it out gently, to protect my own peace. Ava and I have started to build something new. We meet for coffee sometimes in neutral territory. We don't talk much about the past. Instead, we talk about our present. I ask her about her job, and I genuinely listen. She asks me about mine, and she's trying to understand. We are no longer the golden child and the ghost. We are just two sisters, trying to find our way back to each other as equals. My family is not perfect, and our story is not tied up with a neat little bow like the one on Ava's car. There are still scars, but things are different. They see me now. They have to. My house is a constant, unignorable reminder of my capabilities. But more importantly, I see myself. I don't need their validation to know my worth. I found out recently that Ava sold her luxury SUV. She said the payments were too high and it felt too flashy. She bought a modest, practical car with her own money. She told me she wanted to start building something for herself by herself. That, more than anything, felt like a victory. My ledger of lies is archived now, a relic of a past life. I live in my beautiful house, I excel at my job, and I am surrounded by people who love me for who I am. I learned that true wealth isn't about how much is invested in you, but about how much you are willing to invest in yourself. My parents may have thought a small dinner was all my success was worth, but I learned to host a banquet in my own honor. And that has made me a different kind of rich.